Ethan Carter sat at a small corner table of Café Verona, the kind of cozy, softly lit place that promised romance to those who still believed in it. He didn't. At least, not anymore. His best friend Mark had begged him to try this blind date, claiming the woman was his type, smart, kind, and nothing like his ex. Ethan wasn't sure what his type even was anymore, but after too many lonely dinners, he'd agreed. He checked his watch. 6:58 p.m. 2 minutes early. His palms felt clammy against the coffee cup he hadn't touched. Around him, couples laughed, soft music played, and the smell of roasted coffee beans filled the air. He adjusted his tie again, feeling ridiculous. Why was he so nervous? It was just a date. Then the bell above the door jingled. A woman stepped in, brushing a strand of hair from her face as the golden light caught in her brown curls. She wore a simple cream sweater and jeans, but something about the way she carried herself, graceful, yet uncertain, made him forget how to breathe for a second. She scanned the room until her gaze locked on his. "Ethan?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. He stood quickly, nearly knocking over his cup. Yes, that's me. You must be Lila," she finished with a small smile. Her eyes were kind, yet there was a flicker of something deeper. Curiosity, maybe even fear. They shook hands, her touch light and warm, and then sat across from each other. The conversation started with the usual small talk. Work, favorite coffee, how awkward blind dates were. She laughed once, the sound bright but guarded. Ethan noticed how she kept glancing at him, studying his face as if searching for something hidden beneath his polite smile. When their drinks arrived, she stirred her latte absent-mindedly, gaze dropping to the table. "You don't remember me, do you?" she asked suddenly, her tone so soft he almost missed it. Ethan blinked. What? Her eyes lifted to meet his, full of quiet sadness and something hauntingly familiar. "We've met before," she said. "A long time ago." For a heartbeat, the noise of the cafe disappeared. Ethan stared at her, his mind spinning through blurred memories, trying to grasp the thread of recognition that was already tugging at his chest. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The cafe seemed to fade into silence, leaving only her words echoing between them. "We've met before." He searched her face. Those soft brown eyes, the small scar near her eyebrow, the way her fingers trembled slightly as she held her cup. Something about her tugged at the edges of a long-buried memory, one he'd locked away years ago. "You really don't remember?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper now. I'm not sure," he admitted, leaning forward. "Should I?" A sad smile curved her lips. "You used to share your lunch with me. Peanut butter sandwiches, mostly. We were 7. And just like that, the wall inside him cracked. He was back in that gray foster home, rain tapping against the windows, the smell of disinfectant lingering in the halls. A little girl sat in the corner, hugging a threadbare teddy bear, her shoes soaked and her eyes red from crying. He'd sat beside her, pulled out half of his sandwich, and said, "Don't cry. I'll share." "Lila," he breathed, disbelief lacing every word. Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "You remembered." Ethan's pulse quickened, a mixture of shock and emotion flooding through him. He hadn't heard that name in over 20 years. "I thought I dreamed you," he said, his voice breaking. "After I got moved to another home, they told me you were adopted. I tried to find you." "I tried too," she said, her voice trembling now. "But your name was changed. I searched for Ethan Rivers, not Carter." She let out a shaky laugh. "Guess fate wanted to make it complicated." He smiled faintly, though his eyes burned. "You were my only friend back then." Lila reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. "And you were mine." For a moment, neither spoke. The cafe's chatter faded into a distant hum. The years between them, 2 decades of pain, loss, and survival, seemed to dissolve. In their place was that same fragile connection, a thread that time hadn't managed to break. Ethan finally found his voice. "So after all these years, we meet again. On a blind date." Lila smiled through her tears. Maybe it wasn't so blind after all. The rain had begun to patter softly against the cafe windows, turning the world outside into a blur of lights and moving shadows. Ethan and Lila sat in the same quiet corner, their untouched drinks growing cold. Neither of them seemed to care. The conversation had shifted from the polite surface of small talk to the raw, tender depths of memory. "So," Ethan said after a moment, his fingers tracing the rim of his cup, "what happened to you after that day?" "The last thing I remember, you were crying because they said someone was coming to take you." Lila smiled faintly, but her eyes softened with sadness. "Yeah, a couple came the next week. They were kind at first, but I guess I never really felt like their daughter. More like someone they had to fix." She looked down at her hands, twisting the silver ring on her finger. "When I turned 18, I left. Started over." Ethan's chest tightened. "I'm sorry. You didn't deserve that." She shook her head. "You don't have to be sorry. We both know what that world was like." Her gaze lifted to meet his, steady but full of old pain. "What about you? Did you ever get adopted?" He let out a bitter chuckle. "Yeah, by a man who thought discipline was the only form of love. I learned to keep quiet, follow rules, and stay invisible." He paused, the words scraping against old scars. "I guess that's why I grew up not trusting anyone." Lila's expression softened. "But you still shared your sandwich with a crying girl," she said quietly. "That part of you didn't disappear." Her words hit him harder than he expected. No one had ever seen that part of him before. No one remembered the boy who tried to be kind even when kindness was rare. They sat there for a long moment, the weight of unspoken things filling the air. Then, slowly, Lila reached across the table and took his hand. Her touch was warm, grounding. "I thought you'd forgotten me," she whispered. Ethan looked at her, eyes shining. "I never could. You were the first person who made me believe someone cared." Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they weren't from sadness. They were from the fragile, beautiful realization that even after everything, they had both found their way back to each other. When they finally stepped out of the cafe, the evening air was cool and heavy with the scent of rain. Streetlights reflected in shallow puddles, painting the city in shimmering gold and silver. Lila pulled her sweater closer around her shoulders, shivering slightly. Ethan immediately shrugged off his jacket and draped it over her without a word. "You always did that," she said softly, smiling. He raised an eyebrow. "Did what?" "Gave away your jacket, your sandwich, your turn on the swing. You always gave things away." He laughed quietly, his breath misting in the air. "And you always refused to take them, at first." Lila chuckled, shaking her head. "I guess some things don't change." For a moment, they just stood there beneath the awning, the rain falling around them like a curtain between past and present. Neither wanted to leave, afraid that walking away would somehow break the spell of the evening. "So," Ethan began, his tone uncertain, but hopeful, "was this really a coincidence? You showing up tonight?" Lila hesitated, then smiled. "Maybe not entirely. Mark, the one who set you up. He's my coworker. When he mentioned your name, something inside me just paused. I had to know if it was you." He blinked, surprise flickering across his face. "So you knew?" "Not for sure," she admitted. "But I hoped." Ethan took a step closer, his heart pounding harder than it had in years. "You have no idea how glad I am you came." Lila looked up at him, her eyes shining beneath the glow of the streetlight. "Maybe fate's just late," she said, repeating the words she'd once whispered in that foster home when she'd promised they'd meet again someday. He smiled, recognizing them instantly. "Then maybe we still have time." The rain softened, becoming a fine mist. Without thinking, he reached for her hand, their fingers fitting together as naturally as if they'd never been apart. "Let's start again," he murmured. She squeezed his hand gently. "No," she said, her smile tender. "Let's continue what we started all those years ago." And as they walked down the glistening street, side by side beneath the same stormy sky that had once brought them together, Ethan knew one thing for certain: some promises, no matter how long they take, are never truly broken.